Hello my dear students, and welcome once again to another video for our class in Systems Integration and Architecture. In this video, we are going to implement some data entry functionalities to our Restful Web Service API. However, this time we are going to follow a slightly different approach by employing object-oriented programming. Let's start. First of all, we're going to create our composer file. So composer.json. And here we're gonna require just one package for now, and that is the vlucas/php.env. We'll be using version 2.4. Save it, and now we're gonna composer update, and there we go. Next is we're gonna create a folder for our code. We'll call this folder src, and in our folder src we're going to create first our bootstrap file. All right, this is a PHP file, and we are going to initialize our code for the .env. So first we'll require our vendor. Our vendor is one folder higher, so say // and then vendor/autoload, and then we're gonna use .env /env file, and we're gonna instantiate our .env object. However, this time we're not going to use our current directory for the environment file, because our current directory right now for our bootstrap is inside of src, and we're going to put the .env outside of the src folder. So you're gonna have to say // for that. Actually, we'll have two // because our index will be placed in another folder inside of src. We'll put it inside of a folder public. So it's going to be public. One up goes to src, and another one up goes to the root where we can find our .env file. All right. So next is we're going to create our files. Let's create first our .env file. And here we're gonna create our environment variables. Start with the host, which will simply give localhost for this time. We'll have username. Actually we'll start with database, and we call it app1. We'll be using the same database as before. Next, username is root, and password is blank. All right. Next, inside of our src, we're going to create our database .php, which will be, this time we'll be using a object-oriented approach. So first we'll namespace this to db, and call this class db as well. Okay, and so this class is going to be not just responsible for connecting to our database, but also they will contain code that will actually talk to the database. So all our SQL statements are going to be found in here in this class. So we're gonna create a private PDO attribute, which will then be accessed during construction. So we'll create a constructor for this. Actually, this is a function constructor. And here we are going to initialize our database. So first of all, we're gonna have our variables. Of course, we'll be getting all this from our environment variables. So get env, and start with db host, and then next is our user, db username. We also have our db itself, db name, db underscore database from our environment, and finally password. db password. And we'll also assign our character set, which will simply be UTF-8. And now we'll try to connect. So we'll have a variable this n is equal to a string MySQL colon host is equal to the host, and then separated by a semicolon we'll have db name equal to db name variable. Next, char set will be equal to the character set that we'll be using, which is UTF-8. And then for our options, it's going to be an array. We'll start with PDO, attr mode, PDO, what am I doing? PDO colon attribute mode. This is going to be PDO mode underscore exception, and PDO is it default? I don't remember things. attr default fetch mode. Mantingal ito. I'll be using PDO fetch mode object. Is that correct? No, I think it's just fetch object. We'll see. Then next is PDO attr underscore, and I have emulate prepares make it false. Okay. And error. Yeah, because we have to use PDO. Use. What am I doing? That. Okay. So next is you're gonna actually make the connection. So we'll have try, catch, and we'll be catching a PDO exception. Like so. So we'll be passing in our PDO property. This PDO is equal to new PDO, and we pass in our this n Next, we pass in our user name, and then our pass, and then options, and voila. And then let's just throw new video exception. And then here we pass in our message and code. So that will happen on the constructor, and then we'll just have a method function get PDO, and we'll simply return this PDO. Okay, it's a little longer than what you usually use for our database file, but we are now following object-oriented programming, and suddenly there are no global variables that are floating around without any categorization, and we'll have a cleaner working environment or running environment in this using this approach, right? While we're still here in our database class, let us now add some methods or static methods for this class, wherein we'll be accessing the user table. So we'll have static function. We'll have a function for getting the user, given an idea. Okay. Sorry, it shouldn't be a static function. Okay. So here we'll just get a hold of our PDO property and have a statement. Actually, you don't need a statement. You can go directly and get the data. So we have here this PDO query, select asterisk from users. Let's just order this by full name. Then we'll have at the end fetch all. Oh, actually this is get user o sarang na ka user din. Let's just make this na lang get all users without the ID. Okay. And then just return the data. Then we'll have another one function get user, this time with an ID. And here we're gonna have a statement, and from our PDO property you can execute a prepare and then we'll have execute. This time our ID is of course coming from our parameter ID, and then we'll return the result like that. Okay, I think that will be all for our database for now. Of course, we'll be adding the insert and update functionalities here later on. So next for now is let's move on with our controller class. The controller class is going to be, we'll only be having one controller for this. It's going to be a user controller, since we are only having one database table. So I'm gonna create our new file called user underscore controller.php, And again, it's going to be following object-oriented programming. We'll have namespace controllers. This is class user controller. And then we're gonna have a function called process, and we'll be passing in a URI. Now in the process, since this is a user controller, it's expecting only URIs with the user as the first parameter in the URI. So we can safely put here if URI 1 is equal to user, or it's not equal to user, then we can return what do we call the status code header is gonna be http:/1.1 space 400, say not found, and the body is going to be null. Okay, otherwise we can continue on. Of course, you are also going to this time to make it more organized, we check whatever is the request. So we'll have the method of the request. So we'll have a method is gonna be equal to server request underscore method, and we're expecting the get method, the post method, the patch, and the delete method. So first let's cover our get method. So if method is equal to get, like so, and then here we'll check if there is a URI number 2. So if URI 2, if there is such a thing, actually we have to put it inside of ESET. So if there is a URI 2, this means we have an ID. So our ID is going to be the URI 2, and this simply means that we are going to get user based on the ID. Otherwise, if there is no URI, it means we are getting all the user. So we're just gonna call this get all, like that. And by the way, this should be returned, because these two methods that we are going to create will return something, and that is going to be an array like this. Okay, so let's create now our get user and get all functions. Here we are simply going to use our database, this one, which is inside of namespace db. So our user controller is going to use db. Okay, and inside of here we're gonna instantiate a database is equal to new db, and we are going to use db get PDO to get the PDO. Oh, actually no, we're gonna be accessing the function that gets a user. So get user, pass in the parameter ID, and assign it as a new user. So now if that user does exist, then we will return an array with status code header and body. This is a 200. Okay, and the body is a JSON encoded user. Otherwise, if we have an error, we're going to return again an error, not found. So that is for get user. Now for get all, again we'll have our DB instantiation. We call this users. It's going to be DB get, is it get all? Really? Get all users. Like that. And we can just return immediately this, because if there are no users, it will simply be an empty array. So return, and our status code, this is going to be 200 OK. And this is JSON encoded version of the users. All right, so that's being returned, and here it also is being returned down here. So the one that will call the process will receive an array. Next, we're going to create our index. As I've said, we have to put the index inside of a folder called public, and inside there we put the index.php. First, we're gonna add all the required files, and the first one that we'll be requiring is of course the Bootstrap. And the Bootstrap is inside of bootstrap.php. Next that we'll be requiring is, what's next? The database. The database. All right. Next, of course, we'll require the user controller. Next is gonna define our headers. Para madali I'll just copy paste this right there. Those are our headers. Next is we process our URI. So URI is equal to parse underscore URL server request URI, comma constant PHP underscore URL underscore path, and then we'll explode it. All right. Now we're going to instantiate our controller, which in this case we only have one controller. So we'll just be instantiating that one specific controller, which is the user controller. New user controller. And notice that it's being automatically imported here using the use statement. And then we'll use the controller and call the process and pass in the URI. Of course, that process is going to return a response. So we'll call this response is equal to that. And now we do something with our response. First, we are going to add the header, status code header of our response into here. So we say header, and then from the response we get the status code header. And finally we simply echo our response body. Okay. So now let's try and see the result for this. I'm gonna open up Insomnia. And of course, gonna run the server here. I'm gonna go to cd src public and run the server here at 2121. All right. Okay, so let's try sending this one. And we have an error on autoload. Failed to open stream, no such file directory when the required from our Bootstrap. Let's fix that. Okay. We also have twice here. I think that's, and another error. Don't worry about error, guys. Index PHP page 21 line 21 kuno is null. Index line 21. The response was a null. Oh, okay. We're using post. So should be get. And by the way, it's null because it says that if it is method is equals to get, this is what happen. And there's no thing in it, and there's nothing otherwise. And here, there's nothing being returned. So null gid siya. But let's hopefully, this will hopefully work here. And we have another error. Call to a member function query, on null. So our PDO is null at database line 40. Database line 40, it says that this is null. How come it's null when it's supposed to be instantiated during construction? And when we get a user, when we get all users, the DB is being instantiated right here. Yes, of course, this was never executed because it's wrong. It should be just construct. Okay, let's try again. And we still have the same. Oh, it's a different uncaught error. So this error means that somehow our environment variables were not loaded or were not read. I'm quite sure about this. We have our Bootstrap and we loaded auto. Okay, there you go. relax.env load. Okay, and there we go. Let's get one, and we have one. Now we can continue on with our code, and we'll be adding insert, update, and delete functionalities here. So we'll start by going to our database and coding these particular functions. So we'll have here a function insert, and of course we'll be passing in data, and that data should be an object containing username, full name, email, and password. And that is what we are trying to expect here. So first we'll have a statement and get the PDO from here. prepare, insert into users. So we'll have a username, full name, and then email and password. Inside values, we'll have UN for username, FN for full name, EM for email, and PW for password. Next is we'll execute. And here for our UN, we're going to take it from our data username. For our FN, we're going to take it again from our data full name. Might as well just copy the next ones. Next time is email. And finally, PW for password. And we put this inside of MD5 to encrypt it. Password. And so after that, we can just return nothing to return actually. Okay, and then also okay, let's do the insert first. So in our user controller here, we have here our get method. So we also need to cover if method is equal to post. That means we'll be inserting something. We're not expecting any URI number 2 in this case, because when you post, you don't have to pass any ID. So no URI 2, just URI. Hopefully was user, and the method is post, so we'll be inserting. Here we'll simply return this. And actually and then this insert. So we'll add that method here. Function insert. First we need to get the value or the input data, which is can be taken by using the get file. I forgot. File get contents, and the content is taken from php:// Okay, this will be a text, and we have to convert that into JSON. So we'll have data is equal to JSON decode input. So now we have our data. And now we can pass in that data to our database object. So we'll create a new database object. And we are going to do insert and pass in our data. And simply return an array. So we'll have the status code header. Just make it a success. And our body is null. Oh, actually our body is going to be the input. Alright, let's try this out. On Insomnia, let's change this to post and remove the ID from the user, and in our body we'll add a JSON file which will have username, Let's have username Johnny. Then full underscore name. This will be Juan de la Cruz. Email. Johnny Cruz at yahoo.com. Password, same. Alright, post. We have our JSON. Click on send. Okay, so it reflected our input. And let's check out our database. App users, there you go, Juan de la Cruz. And we can even try and fetch it back by getting the ID and changing this to get, and then user ID, what's the ID? 4. And send, and we do have our Juan de la Cruz now. Look at the password is already in encrypted mode. Okay, so our insert is working fine. Let's proceed with update. So we go back again to our database class, and here we add our update code. Again, we pass in our data. And have our statement. This PDO, we're gonna prepare update users, set, and then we'll have username equals UN, full name equals FN, email equals EM, password is equal to PW. Then where ID is equal to ID, which I forgot to add a reference to the ID on our parameters. So now let's do execute. Right, so here we have FN. It's going to be taken from our data, full underscore name, UN data username, EM data email, and PW is equal to the MD5 of data password. Right. Now in our user controller, of course, here on the process, we're gonna add another else if here for if our method is equal to patch. or our method is equal to put. So here we'll be expecting a URI 2. Actually, if there is no, let's just use the other one, this one. If not is set URI2, then you'll be returning this. Paste it there. This should not be a 400, but a 500 fatal error. Otherwise, we can continue on and we'll have an ID coming from our URI2. And so we can call our insert this insert and pass in the ID. Actually, you also have to return. Okay, and so yeah. Oh no, we're not inserting, we're actually doing the update, and that is what we don't have yet. Okay, function update, we pass in a data, the ID. Here we're gonna, of course, in the same way, get the input and get the data, get a database object, and this time we'll be calling update, and we'll be passing in our data and the ID as well. And we'll return right. Let's try this. We're gonna do patch, and for user 4 we'll be changing the username to Johnny143, and instead of Juan de la Cruz, we'll change this to Lumacad. Then the email is going to be Johnny Walker, and same password, and send. Oops, we have an error. It says invalid parameter number. It's better to see the errors in raw. So you say here, uncaught exception, invalid parameter number in database 71. Let's check that out. Database, page 71, invalid number. We have 4 only, and we're supposed to have 5. So we lack the ID. ID is equal to the actual ID was passed in here. Okay, let's go back and try again. Send. There you go. Now let's check if this is actually what is reflected in our database. Browse again. So here we have Juan Lumaca, Johnny143, Johnny Walker. So there you go, the update functionality. And finally, we'll add our delete functionality. So again, in our database, function delete, we'll delete an ID right here. Again, we'll have our st is equal to this PDO prepare. We'll be delete from users where ID is equal to ID, and we'll have execute. And our ID is of course the ID that is being passed, like so. Now in our user controller, we'll add again another if else or else if here. So else if our method is equal to delete, just like in update, we'll be expecting as a second URI. So put that there. And then of course we get the ID. And simply now return this delete that pass in the ID. Now we don't have this yet. So go down here and add the function delete with an ID as a parameter. And here we're gonna instantiate again our database. What's wrong with this? This is just so again we get the input and the data and a database object. Actually we don't need an input, just the database object and an ID. And now we say db delete, pass in the ID, and return. Oops. Just copy this one. And the body is null. Right. So let's try deleting Johnny Walker. So we go here, delete, don't need any body. So no body. Delete user 4, send. So no response, but we have an OK. And if we check our database, users, we no longer have Johnny Walker. Okay, so we have successfully created all the methods possible for our basic API. This was quite a long video, so I hope you'll be able to follow up and practice on your own. And for now, that will be all for this session. Thank you so much for watching, and see you again in the next one.